and welcome to tonight. It's Bible study. It is Tuesday night. We're glad that you chose to join us. We have an exciting journey that we are continuing on. To start out, let's jump right into the Word, and we'll turn to Genesis chapter 1. Genesis chapter 1, and we will start down at verse 14. And God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be signs and tokens, and to mark seasons, days, and years. And let them be lights in the expanse of the sky to give light upon the earth." And it was so. And God made the two great lights, the greater light, the sun, to rule the day, and the lesser night, the moon, to rule the night. He also made the stars. And God set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good, and he approved it. And there was evening, and there was morning, a fourth day. And so we are heading very quickly toward the month of Tammuz. Rosh Chodesh is this week. It doesn't seem possible. It seems like we just came into the month of Sivan, that we were talking about the month of Sivan. We're coming towards Shavuot, and here it is almost Tammuz. And Tammuz is a significant month in the biblical calendar. It's a significant month in world history and events that have happened. It's as if we blinked our eyes and we're already through the spring feasts, and we're now in the summer months. The summer months are they start with Tammuz. It goes Tammuz, Av, and then Elul. So really, when you think of it, we're only 2 months away from Elul. I don't even want to think of that, because then we're already into the fall time. But there's a little less than 4 months from the end of Shavuot to the beginning of the high holy days in fall. So, I mean, time is moving faster and faster. You know, how many times does Mom say we are in accelerated times? It doesn't seem like, I remember years ago, before we actually started keeping the festivals and stuff, it didn't seem like time moved as fast as it does now. There is an acceleration in it. Historically, the fourth month was the month that God began to bring judgment on Israel for the sin of idolatry. So it's quite a significant month. It's remembered with the fast on the 17th of Tammuz. You know, we've talked a lot about the fast of the 9th of Av, but not so much about the 17th of Tammuz. But the 17th of Tammuz really is a prelude to what occurred on the 9th of Av. And it commemorates 5 different tragedies, which we're going to get into. It's called Tammuz in Jewish tradition, but it's interesting because the name Tammuz is of Sumerian origin. It's not a Hebrew word. Most of the names of the months, as we know them now, are from Babylonian origin, or they come from other things. They're not Semitic in origin. But it's interesting, since Abraham was the son of a Sumerian priest, you know, and we hear the stories of Abraham, especially in the Talmud, when he was with his father Terah, and Terah was under, they believe he was an idol maker in the city of Ur. Since Abraham was the son of a Sumerian priest, it should come as no surprise that Mesopotamia, and later Babylon, came to be regarded as the ancestral homeland of the Jewish people. So this is where they were birthed, basically. Torah states that until Abraham arrived in Canaan, the ancestors of Israel, the nations that were in Israel until the Israelites came in, they served other gods. And that these gods were part of an ancient Near East mythology that derived from ancient Babel in the land of Shinar. If you look at it, you know, we see the story of Rachel when she was stealing her father's household gods, and you see all these things that are mixed in with it. And so you can see that really idolatry was at the heart of so much in the Middle East at the time. Later, Jacob commanded his family to put away the foreign gods from your midst, so obviously they continued having them. They're basically like household images. It was like passed down through the family, so they didn't think much of it. But then, under that influence, long before the captivity of the Jews under Nebuchadnezzar, they had adopted the idea of a fixed calendar based on Babylonian principles and the Sumerian ideology. Some scholars identify Tammuz as the Sumerian or Babylonian sun god by Shamash or Damuzid. And he was thought to be responsible for the seasonal life, death, and rebirth cycle. So Tammuz was a god back then. Beginning with the summer solstice, the Sumerians marked the decline in daylight hours with a 6-day funeral for Tammuz. And this idolatrous custom was apparently adopted by some Jews during the days of the First Temple. Ezekiel 8:14 through 15 says, "Then he brought me to the entrance of the north gate of the house of the Lord, and behold, there sat women weeping for Tammuz." Never saw that in the scriptures before. Then he said to me, "Have you seen this, O son of man? You will see still greater abominations than these." Therefore, the prophet Ezekiel condemned the worship of Tammuz as one of the reasons for God's anger against his people. So Tammuz was not it didn't carry good things for the people of Israel. Ezekiel further forewarned that the temple would be destroyed if the people refused to repent about using pagan assumptions. So there's a lot of foreboding that came in the name Tammuz. But why did they pick these Babylonian names? Why is there a month that's named after this Babylonian god? Why do we even call it Tammuz? Like, you would think that you want to do away with it, like get rid of, hey, there shall be no name of foreign god and come from your tongue, it says. So the Talmud states that the names of the month came up with us from Babylon. In commenting on this statement, the sages say that at first, the reckoning of the months was originally memorial to the Exodus from Egypt. In the Torah, the first month, the second month, and so on are understood in relation to the new moon of the first month of spring. However, after the Jews returned from exile in Babylon, in fulfillment of Jeremiah's prophecy, it will no longer be said, "As the Lord lives who take the people out of Egypt." You see those verses in the Bible that say that. It will no longer be said, "As the Lord lives who takes the people out of Egypt." Rather, it will be said, "As the Lord lives who raised up and brought the people of Israel from the northern land," or Babylon. Babylon was in the north. So they're saying it's a commemoration toward they came out of exile from Babylon. So they began to call the months by the names commonly used in Babylon as a reminder of God's faithfulness. The other idea that comes along with it, in the fact of using especially the month of Tammuz, which is the name of a god, it was a memorial to their sin, and it was like putting it in front of them in their remembrance to remember, don't ever do this again. So if you think of it, if they were worshiping these other gods. If Tammuz was one of the ones that Ezekiel was warning them not to participate in this, then therefore when they were saying, every time they called the name of the month Tammuz, they're reminded of the past. They're reminded of the history of their ancestors who worshiped Tammuz, and the result being the destruction of the temple. So it's a very living, it's like we talk about, if you forget about your history, you're doomed to repeat it. This is they're very much putting it in front of their thinking. Not in a way of worshiping the god Tammuz, but as saying, this is where we erred. Let's make sure that we put the safeguards in place so that we don't miss it again in that area. And so the fast of the 17th of Tammuz marks the beginning of what's called the 3 weeks of sorrow. It's a 21-day period of national mourning, which is completed on Tisha B'Av, or the 9th of Av. We've been in Washington, D.C. before when it's at the 9th of Av, and the Jewish people who are attending the conference will always be fasting, and they tend to have a tradition to sit on the floor and weep over the destruction of the temple. But as I said in the beginning, it's the events of the 9th of Av didn't start on the 9th of Av. It was a culmination of things that had been leading up to it. 17th of Tammuz is called the fast of the 4th month, which is mentioned by the prophet Zechariah in Zechariah 8:19. The purpose of the fast is to instill a sense of teshuvah, or repentance, by recalling specific tragedies that befell the Jewish people on that day. So we talk about how when something happens in history, or let's take our own lives personally, we can have an event that happens, and this is especially true in children. When you start looking at the early childhood trauma stuff, you start seeing that an event that takes place in this child's life even if they're not aware of a calendar, then when that anniversary comes up each year, there will be certain behaviors, certain emotions, certain things that are attached to it that they may or may not even know how to express, or they may not know consciously the trigger of it. But there will be it's like it's set in motion, a pattern that you have to break. So any decision that we make in our lives, good or bad, can mark us for years to come. You know, it can set in motion. You know, there's so many things that we have even in our everyday life. I think of Dad talking about the apple barn. Like you have that, he would have that smell of the apple orchard over in Bolton Orchards, and it would remind him of his grandfather's apple barn. And so even though it's been, it was like 50 years after he had been in his grandfather's apple barn, but the smell brought him back to the date. So there's a lot of things in our lives that if there's a smell of it, if there's a remembrance, if there's a thought, and it can have the power to bring us back to that place. It can have the power to bring us back to that place, whether it's good or bad. And so is the case for the 17th of Tammuz. So when you start looking at the 17th of Tammuz, it's a fast day the main thing that they're recalling is it's the day when the walls of Jerusalem were breached by the Romans. So that's what led up to the destruction of the Second Temple by the Romans. But that was not the first thing that happened on the 17th of Tammuz. And if we start backing up into the rest of the Bible, what we'll find out is that there was a mark that was made in history much earlier than that. The 17th of Tammuz, so backing up to the 6th of Sivan, which is Shavuot. So exactly 49 days after the Exodus, the Lord revealed himself on Mount Sinai. We have Shavuot. He gave them, all of Israel heard the Lord speak the first two of the 10 commandments. Then Moses goes up onto the mountain for 40 days, gets the rest of the commandments, which is the special of Shavuot. He brings them down. As he's descending Mount Sinai, he witnesses what? The children of Israel worshiping the golden calf. So they're you know, they say, oh, we don't know what happened to Moses. He might have died up there. Let's just make ourselves gods in the shape of a golden calf. So when Moses comes down, he sees the golden calf, sees them worshiping the golden calf. He smashes the tablets of stone. This episode, this date, was the 17th of Tammuz. So that was the first mark on this day, okay? So the children of Israel are involved in idolatry. They're involved in the worship of a golden calf. Here, right, not even 3 months after Shavuot, not even 2 months after Shavuot, what you're having is this incident where they're worshiping a golden calf. Now, that incident right there made a mark in history, as we find out. So the time between the fast of the 17th of Tammuz and Tisha B'Av is also called, and we talked about this before, it's called the time between the straits. Remember, Mom has talked about that before. It's called the weeks between the straits. In Hebrew, it's Bein HaMitzarim, which is a period of time during which many calamities befell the Jewish people. So you see that the Israelites' original sin with the golden calf set off a chain of events that basically started repeating itself through history. Both temples were destroyed during this period. Now, you can't say that that's coincidence, that both temples are destroyed during this specific period in time. Interesting to know that this phrase, Bein HaMetzarim, the word Metzarim can also be pronounced Mitzrayim, which is in Hebrew, the Hebrew word for Egypt. So when you start looking at that, you say, okay, what's the relation to that? Mitzrayim, or Egypt, literally means a place of narrowness. It's a place of restriction. So whenever he's saying, I'm called you out of the land of Mitzrayim, he used that word on purpose. He never said, I called you out of the land of Egypt. He called you out of the land of Mitzrayim because it's the place of narrowness. So this is the time when it's called the time between the straits. It's a time of narrowness. Backing up, when you start to see how Abraham, as I said, he came from a line of idol worshipers. And he here has this encounter with Yahweh, and he sets his family on a different course. But Abraham's genealogy, interestingly enough, came from a very godly line. And if you trace it back, you have the line of Seth, you have Noah, and you have Shem that were in that family line. As we know, Noah had his 3 sons, and 2 of them, they kind of went off and did their own thing, and Shem guarded the covenant. He guarded his father's ways. According to Jewish tradition, Shem was also called Melchizedek. He was the king of Salem who came and brought the offerings to Abraham. And so the other descendants of Noah migrated away from Jerusalem. So you see that, how Melchizedek, or Shem, was the king of Salem, which was Jerusalem. So he's like right there in the holy place. The rest of them migrated away and began to settle in the cradle of civilization, Mesopotamia. It began in the land of Shinar under Nimrod. We've all heard of Nimrod. Nimrod was not a good guy. The beginning of Nimrod's kingdom was Babel, the very location where the tower to heaven was erected and from which the dispersion of the 70 nations occurred. So you see how in one family line, they make different decisions. It's a lot like Ruth and Orpah, and how they each made different decisions. We don't know where Orpah's line ended up. Actually, there's some suspicion as to where her line ended up. But they had the same choice set in front of them, and they made a different choice. And you can trace down through the family lines of how the difference between Shem's family and Nimrod. I mean, completely different. So when you start looking at the in the month of Tammuz, the different events that occurred in the month of Tammuz. Interesting, on the 3rd of Tammuz is the day when there was that great battle in the valley of Ayalon, which is where the sun stood still. Remember when Joshua said, sun, stand still, and moon, stay in your place until Israel gains the victory? So that event occurred on the 3rd of Tammuz. And then you keep going on through the 17th of Tammuz. It's when Jerusalem's walls were breached, as I said. And then it continued down through the ages. I lost my place on here. On Tammuz 9, the walls in Jerusalem were breached by Nebuchadnezzar's armies. This is the first temple. Because of the siege on Tammuz 17, the temple service itself was disrupted due to a lack of animals required for the sacrifices. The temple itself was destroyed, and three weeks later on the 9th of Ab. So this is typically not a good time. So it's like we're heading into this month of Tammuz, and it's like, oh great, you don't have any good news for us? This is a time of sadness and sorrow. We really don't need that right now. Can we just have some good news? Well, there is good news. Just hang in there. So you see the pattern throughout the history of the children of Israel, that they had a challenge adhering to the prohibition against worshiping idols. I mean, all you have to do is read through the kings, you read through the prophets, and you see time after time after time, they built the idols in the high places, and they worshiped them. And so naming this month after a false idol is a reminder and a commemoration to overcoming past mistakes. So it's like, okay, they may have missed this in the past. That doesn't mean they have to in the future. Okay, just because this is the pattern that you may have set in your life up until this point, at any point you can make a decision, a quality decision to change the course of your life. To say, I'm not going to go down that path, and I'm going to change paths and go down this path instead. So the weeping isn't over idols. It's not weeping over Tammuz like Ezekiel is saying, but it's weeping over the sins that caused the exile. Sins causes a separation from Yahweh, causes a separation from your promises. So if you have something in your life that you're believing for, that you're wanting to come to pass, then it's time to start putting away the old. Start leaving Egypt. We keep talking about that since Passover, but Egypt had such a stronghold in the lives of the children of Israel that you keep seeing it throughout their history, really. Now, interesting, when you start looking at they made a golden calf. Well, where did the gold come from? Gold came from Egypt. It was supposed to be used in the worship of Yahweh. They had a choice of what they were going to do with Yahweh, with what Yahweh gave them. So you see, in that instance, when you relate it to people saying, well, things are bad, money's bad, and all that. No, it's not the money that's bad, it's what you do with it. Because later on, when they started building the tabernacle and then the temple, people were bringing offerings of the gold and all the stuff that they had brought with them. So it's like, what are you going to do with what he's blessed you with? Is Exodus 20, verse 1 through 8 says, "And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me." Why is that the first commandment that he gave them? Because it's the most important. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in earth beneath, or that is in the water, or under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me. That's some pretty serious words there. So these original forefathers, their words, their worship of the idols affected their children. They passed it down to their children, and they continued on that seed within them. 1 John 5:21 says, "Little children, keep yourselves from idols." So lest we think that idolatry is something that's just in the Old Testament, come over into the New Testament. The Amplified of that says, "Little children, keep yourselves from idols, false gods, from anything and everything that would occupy the place in your heart due to God, from any sort of substitute for him that would take first place in your life." I think that says it the clearest. I mean, so there's so many of us that can say, we can tend to think of idolatry as a thing of the past. Like, okay, they made this image, and they bowed down and worshipped it, and that doesn't happen nowadays. Oh yeah, it does happen nowadays. There is such a thing as idolatry now. There's many, actually probably even more idols today than there ever were in the ancient times. And they might look different than the idols of the past, but they're just as dangerous, and Yahweh takes them just as seriously. So what is an idol? An idol is anything or anyone that becomes more important to us than God. That can be anything. It doesn't necessarily have to even be a bad thing. You know, an idol can be something that Yahweh has given you, he has blessed you with, but that you're taking it and you are giving it more attention, more of your heart, more of your passion than you are the worship of him. That's when it becomes an idol in your life. So it's not whether you have things or you have people in your life, it's whether those things or those people have you or have a place in you that only Yahweh is supposed to have. Even good things can become idols when we make them the ultimate thing in our life. In ancient times, it would have looked like bowing down to worship a golden statue. Modern day idols may be more of getting identity from our job or something in our life, or staring at our technology all day. That's a big one. If you're constantly looking at your device and you can't part with it, then maybe it's an idol in your life. And I think that's something that we all need to look at. Amen? So the question is, when you start looking into it for yourself, do I have idols in my life? Where do I spend my time? Where do I spend my money? Where do I get my joy? And what's always on my mind? Those 4 questions really are, if you can ask yourself those questions and answer them honestly. I mean, you can't live in denial. How many times did Dad say you have to know yourself? You have to locate yourself. Where am I at? And answer honestly where you're spending your time, money, where you're getting your joy, And what's always on your mind? And if you can answer that honestly, and if it's not Yahweh or the things of Yahweh, then your priorities are out of order. And it's not a bad thing to be able to say that, because when you can recognize it, you can change. And there's so many things that in our lives, like we were talking about, the pull of Egypt, like there can be an idolatry even in the past, where we're looking at things from the past as if that's the ultimate source of joy, and if I can just have that, then I'll be happy. But Yahweh's always bringing us forward. He would never bring us back to the past. He has new things for us. He has a new way and new ways of doing things, and he's always going to lead you into something that is for your ultimate joy and fulfillment. He's not going to lead you into something that you have no life, no joy. Life is just boring and just can't wait to get to heaven. It's not what his perfect will is for you. And if we just trust him, and if we just let ourselves, submit ourselves to him and trust that he has the best way, then we're going to find that it's going to be the happiest part of our life. 1 Corinthians 10:14 says, "Therefore, my beloved, flee from idolatry." How many times do we see that in the New Testament where it says to flee from certain things? And flee means flee. Flee means to run. It doesn't mean just, oh, I see that thing potentially could have a hold on me, so maybe it would be good for me to put that aside and just kind of step away from it. No, it means I'm going to drop it and I'm going to run the other way. Like Joseph, okay? Like Joseph fled from that house. Get out of there as quickly as you can. He's saying that this is an important thing. It's vital. You don't even want to mess with this. And why is that? Because it has the potential to destroy your life. Why was Yahweh so passionate through the prophets to warn the people of Israel to stop worshiping the idols, to forget about Egypt, don't go to Egypt, don't turn to those things, because he knew that they would end up destroying things in their lives. And ultimately, it was for the sin of idolatry that they were exiled from the land. And that's a pretty serious thing. Yahweh says that I am the Lord, I do not change. So if he's the Lord and he does not change, then are we potentially living in a spiritual exile because of having things in our lives that are idols? Something that we need to examine. If we have things in our lives that are idols, it's going to block our blessings. I mean, the ultimate blessing for the children of Israel was being able to come into the promised land and live, and what does it say? You'll each sit under your own vine and under your own fig tree, and you'll be in the land of milk and honey, and you'll be blessed. And you see all the blessings and the promises that are attached to being in the land and living in the land. And how many times he says, do not forget, when you have all these things, do not forget I'm the one who gave you them. Don't forget me. It's easy. It's easy to start to slip into a place where we think that we've built our lives, where we think that everything I have is because of my hard work and what I've done. But you know what? If it wasn't for Yahweh, you wouldn't even be able to work. If it wasn't for Yahweh, you wouldn't be able to get out of bed every day. He's the one who gives you the ability, what does it say? The ability to get the wealth. So everything in our lives should always go back to him. It should be like, you know what, I'm blessed with, a job, and it's because of you. And therefore, we honor him with the job. And therefore, if the job, think of the example that Dad used when the man who came to the Lord and said, I got to leave my job. And he's like, well, just because you come to the Lord doesn't necessarily mean you need to leave your job. Let's not get that extreme. He said, well, what do you do as a job? He's like, well, I'm a drug dealer. Okay, yeah, you need to leave your job, like now. That is definitely a thing that's not okay. So it depends on what your job is, and if you're honoring Yahweh with it. If you're an abortionist, you need to leave your job. If your job is not honoring God, or if they're requiring things of you that would require you to violate a commandment of the Lord, or they would require you to do something against your conscience, then it's not a job from Yahweh. And you know what the answer is? Leave the job. What did he say to Abraham? Go into a land I will show you. Sometimes you have to leave some things behind in order to become a great nation. Sometimes you have to leave some things behind in order to reach the fullness of the promise that he has for you. And in the leaving is not just, it shouldn't be a scary thing, because it's not like I'm leaving and I've not been told anything, I have no clue, I have no idea where I'm going. It's like you're kind of like drifting in the dark. No, he said, go into a land I will show you. So he's saying that there's a land. You might not know where it is now, but there is a land I will show you. So if you're going to be willing to drop the past, drop Mitzrayim behind, drop that narrowness, you think of the narrow-mindedness that some of us have had from patterns we've built over our life, habits we might have picked up, things that we might have been having as strongholds, or this is the way I've always been, this is the way I've always thought. Well, if we'd be willing to leave the narrowness of Mitzrayim behind and go into a land he will show us, in that act is the fulfillment of the promise. And that is your first step into the best place of your life. You know, Yahweh always wants us to be in the right place, at the right time, with the right people, doing the right thing. And oftentimes, right as you're about to make that step, right as you're about to make that transition, suddenly somebody in your life will show up, or something will pop up that will be a tie or a pull to the past. Look at what happened when Terah and Abraham left Ur. Well, they went to a certain distance, and then Terah settled down. He decided, I'm going to just stay here. I think this is far enough, and we're just going to settle here. Well, Abraham said, no, I was told to go into a land, and this isn't the land. So he had to leave once again. So sometimes there will be things, and it's the enemy. You know it's the enemy because it comes exactly, the timing's too exact to be coincidence. That exactly at the moment when you're about to make that big decision that you know that Yahweh has told you to make, when you're about to take that step into what you know inside of you Yahweh's called you to do, right at that moment, all these things will start happening. Like, what we were talking about on Sabbath, all those different things that are trying to interrupt and hinder, and these, we call them little foxes that spoil the vine, that the enemy just tries to throw into your way. And what is it? It's like he's throwing these little roadblocks and obstacles in your way to get you off the path. To say, well, this path's too hard, I guess I'm going to look for a different way. Rather than think, let's just get the obstacle out of the way and keep going. That needs to be our thinking, I think, a lot more of the time than trying to find a different way. No, let's just move the obstacle out of the way. I think of one of the times when we were in Israel. I think it was the first trip we took as a church in 2007. And we were headed toward, I believe it was Alon Moray, on that little dirt path that goes to Alon Moray. And the bus is like over all the bumps. And I mean, it was some bus drivers won't even drive on that. But we're heading down there, and somehow there had been this giant boulder that had rolled into the path. And this is the only path, and there's no turn. You can't turn around in the middle of this path. It's literally just wide enough for the bus. There's nowhere else to go. So what happened was, I think it was Scott and Yaakov and Dad and Justin and there's somebody else, and they got out and they rolled this big stone out of the path to make the way. How many times do you see in throughout the prophets where it says, make way for the Lord, get rid of the obstacles, get rid of anything that would block or hinder him being able to have free access to you? So what we need to start looking at is, are the things in our life, how many times do we say this, are they good or are they God? Is this thing in my life a good thing or is it a God thing? Is it something that he's directed me to do, or am I taking stuff on me that's not good, that's not from him? And if we start clearing those obstacles away, if we start to drop off the things that are not what we're called to do, and to start to drop off the weights and start to drop off those sins that so easily entangle and all those things that are hindering us on our race, we're going to find we get to our destination a lot quicker. You know, I think of when I'm hiking, there's a lot of people that I see on the trail, and they're called trail runners. And trail runners look a lot different than most hikers. So you see most hikers, they have these big backpacks. They might have trekking poles, backpacks full of water, and whatever equipment they need. Usually a trail runner will have this little tiny backpack that all it has is water in it. and maybe a few food bars. And they usually have very, very light shoes. They don't have the hiking boots. They're very minimally dressed so that they can be fast, so that they're not hindered or held back. And they are running up these mountains. And I see them, and sometimes it's like, oh my gosh, how are you doing this? Like, there's some of them that it's like, man. But that didn't come without training. And it didn't come without removing the weights. I can assure you that person who's running that mountain, up that mountain, wouldn't be able to do it with my 30-pound backpack on his back as easily. He might be able to do it, but he's going to be slower, it's going to hold him back, and he's going to be a lot tired of getting up there. So when we're running our race in life, there's a lot of things that could drain us. There's a lot of things that, and you know what? There's enough things just in life in general that are draining without having things that we're adding to ourselves that we could remove from our backpack and get off of us that won't be an extra tiredness on us. And I think we'll find that our race will be a lot easier once we start doing that. You know, as I said before, Yahweh always knows best. And those things that he's telling you to drop off, and for each of us it's something different. You know, what he might be telling me to get out of my life isn't what he's telling you to get out of your life. It's going to be different because each of us are on a different journey, but we're headed on to the same destination. And so when he was giving them the direction in the wilderness, he was intending for them to reach their promised land and to live in it and to be blessed, and you're going to be my people. That was how he had it intended. They took these side trails, they took detours, they fell off the cliffs at some points, and he kept trying to bring them back on path. So their path, instead of being the direct path up the mountain, ended up wandering this way and that way. And when you get to that place, you're a lot more tired than if you just take the direct path. You don't have any obstacles or hindrances in your way. And so when you look at it, it was during this time of year that the spies were sent to Canaan. You know, we know this. We know the whole story of the spies. They were sent to spy out the land. 10 gave a negative report, and only 2 gave a good report. They believe that happened on the 9th of Av, when they came back and gave the evil report. They explored the land for 40 days, discovered what kind of people were there, what kind of cities they would find, the lush vegetation that would be a supply of food for them and their livestock. They returned and told Moses that, yes, the land's a great abundance, but we're not going to be able to enter. In that sense, they're putting themselves above Yahweh by saying we can't enter the land, because he said you could. Okay, so who are you, man, to say that you can't do what God has told you that you can do? They perceived themselves to be extremely small, and that the inhabitants also viewed them this way too. Only Caleb and Joshua, who had their eyes focused not on themselves but upon the Holy One, stated that the people should ascend and begin to take the land, because their eyes were in a different place, because they had thrown off the weights of Egypt. Obviously, they had removed all. You got to figure, Caleb and Joshua grew up in Egypt the same as all the rest of that generation. The same as the rest of the generation that's saying, oh, that we would be back in Egypt with the leeks and onions and watermelons and whatever else. You didn't see Caleb and Joshua, because why? They had a different spirit. It says that they had a different spirit about them. And they had a different spirit. They had to have made a decision at some point along the journey that this is God and I'm going to trust him. I'm going to follow him. Whatever he says goes. And they completely let go of the land of Egypt. They showed that it was possible. Caleb and Joshua proved that it was possible to follow what Yahweh did and to receive their blessing. Because as we see, when they finally went in, here's Caleb, and he's what, like 80 years old, and he says, give me my mountain, I'm going to go take it. And he was as strong that day as he was the day he left, because Yahweh had supported him. And that's what you're going to find. As you start going along your path, Yahweh gives you the strength and the ability to do it, because you're doing his will. There's the strength to carry it out within that. The problem with what happened is that they had the wrong perspective on the situation. They were looking at it from the wrong eyes. They didn't see beyond the obstacle. Yahweh saw, get the obstacle out of the way, there's the land. He saw the giants in the land as no more than the stone that was in our path as we were going along that road. Just get it out of the path and keep going. They saw it as basically the end. This is the end. There's no way. It's not possible, because they weren't seeing it from above. You know, it's like when you can see something. Say you walk up to a wall here, and it's like, oh my goodness, that wall is so tall and all that. But what happens if like a drone flies over it? Makes the walls seem really, really tiny. So if we start looking at things from Yahweh's perspective, the problems, the obstacles, the things that are strongholds that seem so mighty and impenetrable to us, when we look at it in Yahweh's eyes, it's going to seem puny and insignificant. And the key is that we need to stay in that perspective and not come down. You know, it says, you know, we stay up on our place on the wall and we don't come down. When you're up on the wall, you have a better perspective on things. You're seeing things from above. You're not seeing things from the mere earthly realm. You have a bird's eye view, so to speak. And when you have that view, like I said, it's gonna give a different perspective in your life. So if there's something in our life that we're finding particularly challenging to overcome, maybe it's because we're looking at it from this level and not this level. Again, you know, when it talks about the sins that so easily entangle us and throwing them aside, when you start comparing them from Yahweh's perspective to the glorious things that he has in store for us, they pale in comparison. If you start to know him more, if you come to a place where you know him deeper, then those things of the flesh will not have their attachment anymore. And you start to have more ability to break off and break free from the blinders of the past. So if the spies, you have to wonder, if the spies had kept their eyes on Yahweh and off of themselves and their adversaries, how would things have turned out different? You know, so again, you're in this time period where they're searching out the land and all that. Same thing as happens back at the sin of the golden calf. They compromise because they don't see it from his perspective. And it set up that whole time period. Again, they believe this happened on the 9th of Av. We'll get more into that probably next month as we talk about Rosh Chodesh Av. But the 9th of Av is the days of destruction throughout history. And you start lining it side by side, and it's pretty shocking. But when you start to look at it, the Hebrew months, they all have a letter to them. We talked about that before. The letter of the month is the letter Het, which portrays light radiating from your eyes or revelation vision. So you're seeing things from the right perspective. You're seeing things. So it's a month that we need to overcome the enemy of distraction through worship, through seeing things from Yahweh's perspective. So if you're worshiping Yahweh, your eyes are off of yourself. If you're worshiping Yahweh rather than, you know, you think of the people who are worshipers of idols or they have other things in their life, ultimately it all comes back to them. When you worship Yahweh, it's an act of surrender where everything is him. You're surrendering everything to him. And in that surrender, you're going to see a lot more clearly. So when you look at Tammuz, this is just kind of a timeline of Tammuz throughout history. So the 3rd of Tammuz, Joshua stops the sun. The 3rd of Tammuz was also the death in 1994 of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson. The 5th of Tammuz is when Ezekiel received his chariot vision, the wheel within a wheel and all that. The 6th of Tammuz was Operation Entebbe. We know well about that. That was probably one of the greatest miraculous events in the history of Israel as a modern nation. The 9th of Tammuz, Jerusalem's walls were breached by Nebuchadnezzar II. It was a day that was observed as a fast day until the second breaching of Jerusalem's walls by the Roman Empire on the 17th of Tammuz. 12th to the 13th of Tammuz, this rabbi was in prison in the Soviet Union. It was marked as a significant time because this was a time of persecution for the Jewish people in the Soviet Union. the 17th of Tammuz, again, the golden calf offered by the Jewish people 40 days after the giving of the Torah. Then you have on the 17th of Tammuz, the smashing of the first tablets by Moses. 17th of Tammuz, the sacrifices in Solomon's temple were discontinued in 586 BC. Then in the 17th of Tammuz, in the year 70, walls of Jerusalem were breached by the Roman army. And then the 17th of Tammuz, also the Roman general Apostomus burned the Torah and placed an idol in the second temple. So it's like, okay, so you began with the sin of idolatry, and now there's an idol in your temple, and the temple is destroyed later. Can you see the prophetic timeline? That there's things follow this pattern, and unless we do something to change it, unless we make a, like, this stops here, this stops with us, like we talk about generational curses that pass down through families, it has to be a decision on your part that you're not going to continue what has passed down from your father to your grandfather, from your grandfather to your father to you. You've got to make a decision that it stops with you. So that's all the events that occurred on the 17th of Tammuz. Now, paralleling this, I'm kind of bringing it up to modern times. There's another significant event that's happening this week, and it happens to be occurring on the Rosh Chodesh of Tammuz, and it is a solar eclipse. You know, we all talk about that. It's interesting because they're calling it a ring of fire eclipse. It's like, okay, it's a ring of fire eclipse. May 26th, just a couple weeks ago, we had the solar eclipse, was also a blood moon. So let's turn over to Joel chapter 2 for a minute. And we'll read verse 10 real quick. The earth quakes before them, the heavens tremble. The sun and the moon are darkened, and the stars withdraw their shining. So that's one clue right there. Then skip on down to verse 27. And you shall know, understand, and realize that I am in the midst of Israel, and that I, the Lord, am your God, and there is none else. My people shall never be put to shame. And afterward I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh. And your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, your old men shall dream dreams, and your young men shall see visions. Even upon the men servants and upon the maid servants in those days will I pour out my spirit. Verse 30, and I will show signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth, blood and fire and columns of smoke. The sun shall be turned to darkness and the moon to what? The moon to blood. You know, we can look at the Bible sometimes people look at it so literally, like, how is the moon going to be turned to literal blood? Well, have you ever thought of a blood moon? Why do they call it a blood moon? Because it's red. We talked, remember years ago when we had the blood moon tetrad. The sun shall be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the great and terrible day of the Lord comes. And whoever calls on the name of the Lord shall be delivered and saved. For in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem there shall be escape as the Lord said, and among them shall the Lord calls. Signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. And then you have the fire and blood and fire in columns of smoke. So what do you have this year? We had the blood moon. Now we have the ring of fire eclipse. I don't think that that's a coincidence. You know, when you start looking at from Genesis 1:14, where it said that these shall be signs for you. These are going to be marking days and times and seasons. He always used things in the natural realm to play into his prophetic calendar. Just look at the things that Hank Kuhneman had prophesied about that started happening. We had the snow in places where it wasn't supposed to snow. We had the rain and the rains and the rains and the rains, and it seemed to go on. And then the winds. You know, there's so many times throughout biblical history and modern history where things would start happening in the natural realm, on the earth, in the sky, and they would be pointing to significant events. Now, historically, what they believe is that the eclipses have to do with events that are going to occur in the nations of the world. The lunar eclipses have to do with the nation of Israel. Think of it, they go by the lunar calendar. And the sun has to do with things that are going to happen in the nations, the rest of the nations. Luke 21:11 says, there will be mighty and violent earthquakes, and in various places famines and pestilences, plagues, malignant and contagious or infectious epidemic diseases, which are deadly and devastating, and there will be sights of terror and great signs from heaven. So there's a lot of signs that are going to be starting to happen. It says that that's going to happen before the day of the Lord comes. Based on an interpretation of Genesis 1:14, Rabbinic Judaism considers celestial events to be signs from God. And God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs. An eclipse is a prime example of such a sign. As the Talmud states, when the luminaries are stricken, it is an ill omen for the world. To what can we compare this? To a king of flesh and blood, who prepared a feast for his servants and illuminated a lantern in the hall. But then he became angry with them and said to his servant, take the lantern from before them and seat them in darkness. What does that sound like? It sounds like Yeshua's parables. Remember when he talks about this is what the kingdom's going to be like. A king set a banquet, and then he goes through and he invites the guests, and then some of them don't want to partake. So he says, cast them out into the darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Yeshua is a rabbi along with the contemporaries of his day. This was something that they all were talking about. They use these similar parables, and when you start looking at it, you start saying, wow, the people in the Talmud believed in Yeshua. Well, they all tended to come to the same conclusions based on the scriptures. Jewish scholars knew that eclipses were predictable events, but they considered them related to human actions. As Yehuda Sherpin explains, an eclipse is not caused by sin. Rather, it is an indication of a trying time, a time when there is a natural predisposition for sin and for strict judgment of that sin. Well, I think we're living in such a time now. I mean, when you start seeing the absolute insanity that's going on, the craziness, the fact that, I mean, we really are living in a day, like the Bible says, where evil is called good and good is called evil. I mean, to extreme proportions that I don't think even we imagined years ago it could have gotten to. I mean, it's unimaginable things we don't even want to know about. But when we compare it with history, and when there's been eclipses and stuff that has happened in history, it's very interesting. Another famous eclipse, an eclipse of the sun, may have played a part in the account of Jonah and the Ninevites. The time of Jonah's preaching in Nineveh can only be estimated very generally from the Bible. 2 Kings 14:25 says that Jeroboam II, king of Israel, restored the northern and eastern borders of Israel. Jeroboam began a relation with his father Jehoash and reigned alone from 782 to 781 to in the late summer or early fall of 753. Assuming that Jonah's prophecy of restoration came early in the reign of Jeroboam, Jonah's ministry would have been in the first half of the 8th century BC, from about 793 to 750 BC. That would have been Jonah's prophecy, prophetic ministry. During this time, the Assyrian eponym canon records an eclipse of the sun that occurred in the eponym of Ber Sagale in the month of Samanu, which is parallels with this time. Modern astronomical calculations date this eclipse to June 15th, 763 BC, and show it was a total eclipse as it passed near Nineveh. Very interesting. So about the time when Jonah's prophesying to the Ninevites, you know, you have this many days, the Nineveh is going to be destroyed, there occurs this total eclipse of the sun near Nineveh, and it's documented. For historians, the importance of this eclipse is that it provided an absolute date that allowed assigning BC years to the yearly eponyms of the Assyrian. The accuracy of the AEC dates was later confirmed when newest inscriptions were found, And they were also compared to the data derived from Ptolemy's canon. So when they start looking at it, NASA graphics shows the path of the solar eclipse. They actually can go back and say, on this date is when the solar eclipse occurred, and we can tell exactly the path it would have taken. It would have been seen as a total eclipse in the area about 4 miles northeast of the modern city of Mosul, Iraq. The province of Nineveh occupied a considerably larger territory. So they would have seen this total eclipse. Could this eclipse be part of the reason why Jonah, when he finally got to Nineveh, found a city that was serious about repentance? You got to figure these people all had astrologers and astronomers that were looking at the signs in the heavens, and they would have said, okay, this is something to take seriously. So based on that, it's interesting to say that that eclipse was not the only thing that took place during that time. You have the records recount a plague in 765, the eclipse and revolt in the city of Asher in 763, a revolt again in 762, a revolt again in 761 and 760, and a plague plus a revolt in the city of Guzana in 759. So you have all these things that start occurring right after this eclipse happens. So it's very interesting when you start seeing that. This would date Jonah's appearance at Nineveh to 759 or 758 BC. So Nineveh finally repents after all this stuff starts happening, and they see the eclipse and they realize God's serious. So the thing is, what do we do about this? When we start seeing these things happen, what do we do? Luke 21:25 through 28 says, "And there will be signs in the sun and moon and stars, and upon the earth there will be distress, trouble, and anguish of nations, and bewilderment and perplexity, without resources, left wanting, embarrassed, in doubt, not knowing which way to turn." Sounds like the world nowadays. "At the roaring, the echo of the tossing of the sea, men swooning away or expiring with fear and dread and apprehension, in expectation of the things that are coming on the world. For the very powers of the heavens will be shaken and caused to totter. And they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with great power and all his kingly glory. Now when these things begin to occur, look up and lift up your heads, because your redemption is drawing near." So when we start seeing these things, that's the hope in the midst of all this. When you start seeing, okay, so this is a time when we're in the straits, there's a time of judgment coming up. This is when we start to look up and lift up our heads, because our redemption is drawing near. We're going to start bringing forward in the next few weeks is there are prophetic indications that point to the fact that Yeshua's return is much sooner than most people think. It says that no man can determine the day or the hour, but we can tell the times. We can tell the times, and we can know the season of his return. And we can tell that the season of his return is at hand. One last thing before I close here. There was a prophecy that came out in relation to the month of Tammuz, which I thought was very interesting, and I wanted to read. "Many of you have been in the battle of a lifetime regarding your health, and I have seen the battle. I have comforted you, strengthened you, and been with you. As you feast upon my word, there will be major shifts in your body. There will be major healings, alignments, and breakthroughs in your body. The battle for your body is coming to an end for many of you. Your heart will breathe again. Your heart will see the manifestation of the prayers you have prayed for healing and freedom. I am bringing life back to hearts. I am bringing healing to hearts. I am freeing you from the pain that has held your heart in a place of suffocation. I am bringing healing to your heart from the deep hidden places of hope deferred and discouragement. I'm bringing life back to your heart. I'm bringing strength and vision back to your heart. Your heart will breathe again. Your hearts will know breakthrough. Your hearts will soar on the wings of my spirit, not only to receive your healing and restoration, but to dream again. The enemy has been whispering to so many of you, this is what the season is going to look like, or this is what is going to take place in this season. But my people, fear is attempting to steal your inheritance. Discouragement is attempting to steal your joy. Weariness is attempting to steal your strength. But my fire is coming to bring a great igniting of joy in the season that is upon you. There is a turning and a tuning taking place right now. I am turning the heaviness into joy. I am tuning your hearts and your ears to hear true reality, heaven's reality. Your greatest adventure with me is upon you. There is nothing to fear. There is nothing to dread. There is nothing to worry about, for I am the God of victory. And I am about to display even greater demonstrations of my victory in your life. I am resetting the stage. I am repositioning you. I am refueling you. I am refreshing you. I am rejuvenating you. I have so many beautiful divine surprises planned for you. The enemy is attempting to bring fear and foreboding because of the divine surprises I am beginning to release. As I said, right at that moment is when the enemy tries to come with all these things to throw you off course. What the enemy is whispering, I am decreeing the opposite loudly. Life, joy, restoration, increase, new opportunities, provision, health, fruitfulness, and major demonstrations of my power. Many of you are going to see your heart suddenly shift from heaviness, discouragement, and weariness to more vision, strength, passion, joy, and life than you have ever felt before. Your hearts are being set on fire again for who I am and what I am doing. This is your season of your greatest adventures with me. Even when it feels like you are walking through darkness, my light is going to shine brighter than ever. My voice will be louder than you have heard. My faithfulness and power will be displayed greater than you have ever seen. Many of you have become accustomed to walking through such deep darkness and battle, but now you will know the rest of my love and presence as you continue to walk with me. These tipping point breakthroughs of many, many prayers that have been prayed are going to change everything. The landscape is not staying the same. It's affecting everything. It's not something to fear. It's something to rejoice in. The double portions, the river of my spirit flowing stronger than ever, bringing life to all it touches. Oh, my people, the adventures we are going to embark on in this season are going to leave you in wonder and awe of me and my goodness in unprecedented ways. It's time to be refreshed, increased, restored, and positioned again. My wind is coming into your wings again. Raise your expectation and faith. It's a season of your greatest adventures with me. So when you start looking at that in light of what had happened during this time, it's a time of rewriting. We can rewrite the pattern of the past. We can rewrite whatever our tendencies have been, whatever course we may have taken in our lives. We can rewrite it, and we can take our place in Yahweh. We can take our place on His path. We can clear those obstacles out of the path. We can let go of the things from the past, let go of the weights of Egypt. Don't even look back at it. And when we do, we're going to find ourselves flying in a place that we've never been in before, because that's what He has destined for us. Amen? One more thing. I know I said one more thing before. I just thought this was interesting. This was given on June 3rd, and it's called The Fig Tree Has Blossomed. How many times have we been talking about the fig tree over the past couple weeks? John 1:48, how do you know me? Nathanael asked. Yeshua replied, before Philip called you, I saw you under the fig tree. Near the end of our recent 40-day Yeshua fast, this person had a significant dream in which he was with a few spiritual fathers and patriarchs from the cloud of witnesses. They were sitting together beneath a fig tree. A voice spoke in the dream saying, I see you under the fig tree. The first fruits of the fig tree have blossomed during Passover. This happened this year. This was talking about this year. We understand the fig tree to represent Israel. In reality, the Feast of First Fruits occurs every year during the week of Passover. God once spoke of the patriarchs of Israel through the prophet Hosea, saying, I saw your fathers as the first fruits on the fig tree in its first season. Perhaps God is saying now through this dream, I see your fathers as the first fruits of the many who will give themselves wholeheartedly to my purposes for Israel. I said to Mom when I read that, I'm like, that's us. That's us. We have a dad that had given himself wholeheartedly to Yahweh's purposes for Israel. And now what it says is that was the first fruit. And what happens after the first fruit? The harvest comes. We're going to start seeing the fulfillment of those things that were planted. All those seeds, those rich seeds that were planted, the things that Dad spoke to us, the things he planted in Israel, the things that he planted in the kingdom, we're going to be starting to see the evidence of that coming forth. And the fruit of what has been started is going to come to a fullness. And that's the season we're living in. It's an exciting time to be alive. It really is. There might be a lot going on in the world around us, but you know what? We have the power to live as the victorious children of God in the midst of it. We have the power that is residing inside of us to be able to be those lights he's called us to be, because the time is very short. And if Yeshua is to return, let's say he returns this year, we want to be about our Father's business every day, doing exactly what he's called us to do, being exactly in the right place at the right time with the right people, doing the right thing, and we have no time to waste. We are in a time of rewriting, and I'm thinking back on what, I think it was Shmuel, when he was saying that thing during the planting of the trees, when he said that what Dad did was he reversed the sin of the spies when they spoke evil about the land. He was one of those who reversed the sin by speaking good about the land. We're ones who are rewriting. I mean, how much clearer can you get? That was so exciting when I heard him say that. We are part of that. We are part of the ones who are rewriting. And what we're talking about, being the sin of the spies on the 9th of Av, all the events that occurred, the sin of the idolatry of the golden calf on the 17th of Tammuz, we have the ability to rewrite that in the halls of history. It may be that we do. We have that power. We can get rid of all the idols in our lives and live victorious and finish this thing out with a blaze of glory like he's called us to do. Amen? Well, we trust that you've gotten something out of this message. We will see you again on Sabbath at Saturday at 11 a.m. Until then, you have a blessed week in the household of faith.